Ever since I was a kid, the idea of portable gaming has always been incredibly alluring. What started with my Game Boy Color in the late 90s, portable gaming became a mainstay in my life. Now, along the years, there's always been a company that has dared to do things differently, and dare I even say, better? Sony. Having started with a bold splash in the early 2000s, Sony's portable PlayStation endeavor seemingly fizzled out into obscurity by the mid-2010s, having suffered a slow and painful write-off for a system that I think was incredibly ahead of its time then, and still is now. The PlayStation Vita. Before we get to the Vita, we need to travel back to the year 2004 and set the stage with its predecessor, the PlayStation Portable. Prior to the release of the PSP, we were used to smaller screens and upright form factors with the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and dare I even say the Turbo Express? The Game Boy Advance was a change-up in how we held a portable gaming device, obviously more commercially popular than the Sega Nomad and the Game Gear, lovable but clunky. But when the PSP hit the market with a true widescreen display, it was a real game changer. The PlayStation Portable was a technical powerhouse for the time. Considering the on-the-go nature of the system, it could easily take on what the PS1 could handle and more, even being able to go toe-to-toe with the processing power of the PlayStation 2. Not only was it unique in terms of form factor, but the way that we played games via the UMD was really cool and unlike anything we've ever seen before or since on a gaming system. Almost reminiscent of a floppy disk with the disk inside a plastic cartridge. Partner that with the 4 different models, including my favorite, which is the PSP Go. The PSP was a huge success, having sold more than 80 million units during its 10-year lifespan. We can't forget about the PlayStation 1 backwards compatibility aspect of the PSP. This thing is a JRPG powerhouse. Honestly, the amount of hours that I've spent on PSP playing JRPGs is probably the reason why I feel the most nostalgic for the PSP rather than the Nintendo DS. Thanks to the success from the PSP, it was only inevitable that Sony consider a follow-up, right? Rumors of the next handheld started to kick up around 2009 with a console that allegedly rivaled the power of the original Xbox. At that time, could we have imagined another portable system like the PSP, but with touchscreen interactivity on front and back? A better display using OLED technology, better internals, twin joysticks, more comfortable form factor, and backwards compatibility for PSP and PS1 titles? Sounds like the best handheld ever, right? Officially announced by Sony in 2011 after years of rumors as the next-gen portable, this handheld was striving for what seemed to be impossible: PlayStation 3 quality graphics on the go. While these expectations are kind of a bit lofty, it wasn't too far from what we actually got. The hype was brewing for the next PlayStation Portable, and I certainly remember watching the E3 presentations and behind-the-scenes info around that time with growing excitement. Finally released in late 2011 in Japan and early 2012 everywhere else, the long-rumored PSP 2, now called the PlayStation Vita, was finally put into the hands of gamers as an effort to combine the home console and portable experience. Sound familiar? Look, I'll just come out and say it. The Nintendo Switch has a lot of parallels to the PlayStation Vita. What Sony was offering at the time isn't too dissimilar from the Switch. Smaller cartridges, OLED screens, Bluetooth headset capabilities, a feature that would obviously be later patched into the Nintendo Switch, and of course the home hybrid console portable thing. Obviously the remote play capabilities of the Vita offers that. So this was quite literally the closest thing we had to a home console on the go prior to the Nintendo Switch. The PlayStation Vita was intended to be a mixture of a digital and physical console, omitting the UMD in favor of a smaller cartridge, and using Sony proprietary memory cards as they had with the PSP. The Vita was also 3G capable in addition to Wi-Fi, meaning you could download games on the go with an additional data plan. Pretty cool. The Vita also featured a beautiful 5-inch display with a resolution of 960 by 544 OLED screen, which is just as amazing then as it is now. The Vita launched with under 30 titles, a handful of which are first-party and the rest are third-party, the most notable of which was Uncharted Golden Abyss. Finally, we could play as Nathan Drake on the go, the 4th entry into the Uncharted series. And this was also my first Uncharted game, as my parents bought me a Vita for my birthday not long after launch. Also notable in the launch window is Gravity Rush, one of the more popular titles on the Vita. It was originally supposed to be a PlayStation 3 game as well. This game takes full advantage of system hardware with the front and back touchscreen interactivity. A lot of great games came out in the early days, like Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, my personal favorite racing game from that gen. Sorry, Mario Kart 8. And the hugely popular Persona 4 Golden,
A great game I've yet to play, but from what I hear, it's a must-own for Vita owners and RPG lovers. Tearaway is another fun game that fully utilizes everything the Vita has to offer, all wrapped up into a quirky but fun platformer, though not released in that launch window. The ability to control games with not only the front touchscreen, but the back touchpad gave developers and gamers a lot of possibilities for control and storytelling. It was a really unique and out-of-the-box approach to handheld gaming at the time. Aside from basic touchscreen games that were available on phones and tablets back then, for me personally, I found the back touchscreen to be cool but kind of gimmicky at the same time, with not many games utilizing it in the end. The PlayStation Vita user interface was also presented in a clean and friendly way, with the bubble icons ready to be interacted with by a quick tap or a press of a button. A contrast to the cross-media bar or the XMB interface that we know from the PSP, PS3, and 4. You could also stack apps or games in folders similar to what we can do on phones these days. A super handy feature for keeping your screen nice and tidy. From what I've read online, a lot of people either love it or hate it, but it doesn't really matter because you've got the Vita to play games and not stare at the home screen, right? So with all that said, it sounds like the Vita made an instant splash in the market compared to what we knew at the time. Well, kind of. Let's look at the official numbers from what we have access to. In the USA, the Vita sold around 200,000 units in the first month, and then dipped down to 50,000 units thereafter. Worldwide, the Vita sold around 4 million units within the first 10 months of being available, with an estimated 6 million after 2 years at market. After this point, Sony no longer publicly released sales figures of the Vita solely. So compare this to the first month of the Nintendo 3DS, which was 3.61 million units alone, making it one of the fastest selling consoles in history. So what was the issue with the Vita? Why wasn't it selling? And why did it not make the immediate impact that Sony thought it would? Well, it turns out that the market was going in a different direction than Sony thought. And looking at the 2-year sales numbers shows just that. Even after August of 2013 with a price drop and a newer model which included an LCD screen, 1 GB of internal storage, and slightly thinner and better battery, didn't really seem to make a difference. Oddly enough, in 2014, Sony released the Vita TV, a non-portable version of the Vita which connects to your TV like any home console would, and is compatible with either a DualShock 3 or 4. However, a lot of Vita games are unplayable thanks to the lack of touch controls or even the remapped touch controls. Some games are also just straight up not playable for some reason, like Metal Gear Solid HD Collection, which was kind of disappointing. Personally, I think the main focus for the Vita TV being released was a remote play PlayStation, as the Vita TV has an Ethernet port in the back for seamless integration into your home network to pair with a PS4 or PS3 in another room.
So the additional models are great. The variety of options you have for cost versus features are great, but why didn't the Vita succeed? Personally, I think the Vita was doomed from the start. Not just because of one thing, but due to multiple things. First and foremost, I think it was dropped in the wrong place at the wrong time. That being said, the first two things that we can speculate are timing and competition. If you remember, the early 2010s were the rise of mobile gaming on phones and tablets. I even remember playing the odd app or two just for fun to pass the time. But aside from that, even with the growing presence of the Apple Store and the Android Store, chances are you probably had a 3DS.
It's obvious that the 3DS was the superior console in terms of competition, so most consumers opted for this rather than the alternative, which was the PlayStation Vita. The 3DS also had a better lineup of games altogether. Sure, there was a lot of shovelware on the 3DS, but a lot of those games were actually alright. Off the top of your head, aside from the few games I mentioned earlier, what notable titles really are there on the Vita? Yeah, there wasn't honestly a lot of AAA support for the system beyond the first 2 years, and it shows. I remember getting pretty bored with my Vita relatively early on, which was pretty sad. Other independent developers and well-known limited-run games still released physical and digital versions of games on the Vita. This is what made the Vita fun and still kept the system alive even when Sony had turned their back on it. The support for older games was there, kind of. I was always disappointed that Crash Bandicoot and Spyro were never officially supported. I usually gravitated towards these classic games on the PSP, and found myself kind of disappointed with the Vita in that regard, but more on this later. We can also look at the lackluster support from Sony altogether. I think after the first 2 years, Sony realized the Vita was not going to be a commercial success, so they started to pivot the marketing with remote play being more of a focus, really tethering it into more of a hybrid home portable console than before. As I mentioned before, Sony was really onto something with this idea. Remote play on the PlayStation Vita essentially works through two things: local Wi-Fi signal from your PS4 or an internet connection to control your PS4 through the internet. Cool in theory, right? However, However, even with my internet being reasonably okay, it can still struggle. It's not a perfect arrangement, but it does work well enough if someone has taken over the TV and you're sitting on the couch not too far away. Sadly, with the built-in 3G capabilities that the Vita has, remote play isn't even possible. So you really need reliable and stable internet connection to even make this remotely possible when you're away from home. Obviously, with the release of the Vita TV, this became more of a workable solution. I asked some of the great people in my Discord why they thought the Vita might have failed, and the answer I heard the most was the memory cards that were needlessly expensive. And even now, for a high-capacity Vita memory card, you can find listings on eBay for over $100 just for 64 gigs of storage, which isn't a lot by today's standards. I do remember the sticker shock even then wanting to grab another memory card. What I used to do was just delete games and re-download as needed. Not ideal, but it did save me a few bucks in the end. Aside from these points, Sony just chose to outright ignore the Vita after a certain point. It's pretty obvious that the Vita failed early in its life, and Sony chose to turn in a different direction and pretend like the Vita never existed, with little to no mention of it at E3 or otherwise.
So with 3 different models, dismal sales, and Sony just throwing it to the side, the Vita was cast into obscurity. Or was it? Enter the world of the Vita homebrew community.
If you remember, back in the day, one of the coolest things about the PSP was the ability to add custom firmware to it and not just play PSP or PS1 games, but a ton of different consoles like the NES, the Super Nintendo, and Genesis, among others. A portable console with the ability to play thousands of games? Amazing. When the Vita was released, I remember scouring the internet to see how the custom firmware situation was going. Because if Sony wasn't going to support this amazing handheld beyond July of 2021, the wider community would, and they've done so greatly. The Vita is an incredibly airtight console in terms of security, so I didn't get my hopes up for an eventual jailbreak, as it were, but that all changed in 2016. There's a really great presentation that's about an hour long, done by Team Molecule, showing you their approach to breaking down the security walls of the Vita. Check the description to watch the entire presentation. I honestly recommend it. I have to give huge credit to those involved in pioneering the homebrew and custom firmware aspects of the Vita. Not only did they love the system enough to do it, but obviously appreciated the wider fan community as well, so thank you. I remember doing things like the Pandora battery trick with the PSP back in the day. Obviously now it's a little bit easier thanks to the amazing people working together to take a system like the Vita off of life support and make it worth buying even now, 10 years after its initial release. There's a lot of great online resources out there, but most notably PS Vita Hacks Guide, which is what I used to breathe new life into my Vita, so check the link down below to follow the guides. So, what are the benefits of a modded Vita? After custom firmware, you'll have access to an app called Adrenaline, which turns your Vita into a full-blown PSP and even allows you to use the right analog stick in some situations. Super cool. You can also exploit the Bluetooth possibilities of the Vita and pair a DualShock 4 to it, allowing you to play in tabletop mode like you would a Switch. With a modded Vita, you can also do away with proprietary memory cards and use SD to Vita, which allows you to use SD cards in a Vita cartridge adapter, giving you more storage on the cheap. A Vita TV with custom firmware also allows you to play games you couldn't before. I mentioned the Metal Gear Solid HD collection earlier for a reason. I bought a Vita TV in mid-2016 with the Metal Gear Solid collection, but when I found out it wasn't supported, needless to say, I was pretty disappointed. However, with some custom firmware workarounds, it is fully playable now. With Sony recently having made it more difficult to access the PlayStation Store to download games, adding custom firmware to your unit makes the acquisition of games, let's say, a little easier than before with the PKGJ app, if you know what I'm saying. Not that I'm advocating for this, but it is one of the many possibilities you have with a modded Vita. The appropriate way to do this is to download digital versions of your physical games so you don't have to take your cartridges out anywhere. The only downside to owning a Vita these days might be the entry price, but aside from that, it can easily become your most loved system, and I can guarantee you that. I'd personally recommend the original OLED model if you can find one, with this particular display being a lot more crisp and clear than its LCD counterpart.
Though the PlayStation Vita was a commercial failure, it's since become a bit of a dark horse, not too dissimilar from the Sega Dreamcast, where the wider fan community has come together to support a system that's long since been left for dead by its developer. Even recently, I remember playing PlayStation 1 games, PlayStation Vita games, even using Remote Play to play Tales of Arise on PlayStation 4. It's a console worth grabbing if you don't have one, because in my opinion, the Vita is the ultimate handheld, even worth having now in 2022. If you want more videos like this, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos coming up. Thanks for watching and have a great day.